the heartbreaking story of an abandoned boy. He survived against all odds. In this emotional story, a young abandoned boy spends years in survival mode at the airport, alone and forgotten. His courage and hope will inspire you. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Stories TH for more touching stories like this one. In the bustling world of Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, a young boy named Ethan found himself alone, waiting for his mother who had promised to return shortly. As the airport hummed with the rush of passengers, Ethan, just a child of 10, held onto his backpack with excitement, imagining the wonderful trip they were about to take. His mother, a woman with a quiet strength that Ethan never fully understood, had appeared to be in a hurry, telling him to wait while she bought their tickets. At first, Ethan was content, imagining the flight that would take them to a beautiful destination, a place full of sunshine and kites soaring in the sky. But what seemed like a normal moment took a sharp turn when his mother didn't come back. Time passed, and with each tick of the clock, his unease grew. Minutes turned into hours, and by the time he ran to the ticket counter to look for her, it was already too late. His mother, as it turned out, was never going to return. Ethan's fear shifted into something far more potent: abandonment. He wandered the vast corridors of the airport, his heart pounding as he searched for anyone who might help him. The chaos of the terminal seemed to swallow him whole. Ethan quickly learned that not everyone was willing to help, and as his hunger grew and his stomach twisted painfully, he resorted to scavenging food from the trash bins in the airport. With each bite of discarded bread, shame mixed with his need for survival. His world had shifted from excitement to cold despair in a matter of hours. Over the next few days, Ethan's situation grew increasingly dire. He learned how to avoid the eyes of security, sleeping in shadowy corners to escape attention. But despite his efforts to remain unnoticed, Ethan still attracted the attention of those around him. He was approached by a man named John, who offered him help, but there was something about the man's offer that didn't sit right with Ethan. His instincts screamed at him to run, and when the man grabbed his arm, trying to take him away, Ethan's fear heightened, forcing him to bolt. In his desperation to escape, he realized that not everyone who seemed kind could be trusted, and the world that once felt so full of possibility had now become a threatening, dangerous place. As the days passed, Ethan turned into a ghost of the airport, learning to survive in the shadows, unnoticed by most of the world around him. He avoided the prying eyes of the authorities, becoming so adept at hiding that he nearly faded into the background of the bustling terminal. But there was always a dark figure watching him from a distance. Samuel, a security guard at the airport, became increasingly aware of Ethan's presence. Though Samuel's cold treatment of him made Ethan feel even more invisible, there was another figure, John, who seemed to always be lurking just out of sight, keeping an eye on him. This constant surveillance filled Ethan with anxiety, as if he was never truly alone, but rather trapped in a web of fear. He started to believe that escape was impossible, that no matter how hard he tried, John would always find him, and so would the dangerous world he had been thrust into. Ethan's life took another unexpected turn when he crossed paths with Margaret, a compassionate flight attendant who had noticed his struggle. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the flicker of hope. Margaret stepped in to protect him, offering him food when no one else cared, standing up for him when others ignored his plight. But even then, Ethan was not free. The threat of John loomed over him, and the shadow of his past refused to let go. Ethan was still haunted by the fact that his mother had abandoned him at the airport, and that Anthony, the man who orchestrated his abandonment, had done so with a twisted plan. Margaret and Ryan, a friend of hers who worked with a charity helping homeless children, became Ethan's lifeline, taking him to a safer place, the House of Hope. For the first time in his life, Ethan had a place to call home, yet the fear he had carried with him for so many years did not simply disappear. Though Ethan found safety in the House of Hope, his anxiety never fully faded. His heart still raced when he saw strangers watching him, and even in the safety of his new home, the past haunted him like a shadow that refused to be cast off. John's words echoed in his mind, trying to convince him that his new life wasn't real, that he would always be alone, always be a part of a plan that he had never asked for. But as Ethan's story unfolded, He slowly began to accept the possibility that things could be different. He found new friends at the shelter, and for the first time in his life, he felt the warmth of a family, something he had never known. He was finally able to see that kindness, true kindness, could exist without strings attached. Eventually, John was arrested, and Ethan was free from his grip. But the lingering fear remained. Would Anthony's shadow always follow him? The final test came when Ethan was confronted by a familiar face from his past. As he stood on the edge of the bridge, he came face to face with John once more. But this time, Ethan was not the scared, vulnerable child he once was. He had survived, he had fought back, and now he had something John could never take away: his own strength. With the help of Ryan, Margaret, and the police, Ethan was able to finally escape the past that had shackled him for so long. His battle was far from over, but for the first time in years, he was no longer alone. He had found hope, love, and a new family, a place where he truly belonged. This was just the beginning of his new life, a life full of possibility and hope, a life that he could finally call his own. Ethan's story begins in the chaotic, fast-paced world of Los Angeles International Airport, LAX. At just 10 years old, he found himself alone, waiting for his mother who had promised to return, but never did. With wide eyes full of excitement, Ethan imagined they were about to board a flight to a beautiful place filled with sunny skies, kites, and warmth. Little did he know that the airport, which had once seemed like a place of adventure and possibility, would become the stage for a heartbreaking chapter in his young life. After his mother hurriedly told him to stay put while she bought the tickets, Ethan obediently sat, trusting her completely. But as minutes turned into hours and still no sign of her, a creeping sense of unease settled in. He searched frantically for her, asking airport staff for help, but no one seemed to care. By the time he realized his mother had truly abandoned him, fear began to surge inside him. For days, Ethan wandered the airport, learning to survive like a ghost, hiding from security and scavenging for food from trash bins. Every act of survival stripped away the remnants of his childhood innocence, leaving behind a boy hardened by loneliness and desperation. As Ethan grew more accustomed to the harshness of his new life, he learned that not everyone in the world could be trusted. He was approached by a man named John, who offered him food and shelter, but there was something about the man that didn't feel right. John's offer of kindness was tainted with a strange, unsettling undertone that made Ethan feel vulnerable. When John tried to grab him and pull him away, Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run, and so he did. This terrifying experience taught Ethan that kindness could hide dangerous intentions, and no one in his life could truly be trusted. For 6 years, Ethan lived this way, unnoticed and ignored by most of the world around him, while constantly pursued by the looming figure of John, a man who had been part of a dark plot to exploit Ethan as a pawn in a human trafficking scheme orchestrated by a criminal named Anthony. Despite his best efforts to blend in, Ethan couldn't escape the suffocating fear of being watched. The airport had become a prison in his mind. He was a child without an identity, living in the shadows, unsure of who he could trust. That is, until he met Margaret, a kind flight attendant who noticed Ethan's suffering and chose to help him. Margaret gave Ethan food and protected him from the harsh world that had once turned its back on him. But even with her support, Ethan's past refused to let go. Anthony and his network of accomplices had infiltrated every corner of Ethan's life, and the threat still loomed large. The darkness of his past never fully receded, and Ethan was left constantly looking over his shoulder, never able to fully believe that he was free from the grasp of those who had tried to use him. When Ryan, a man working with a charity to help homeless children, joined their cause, Ethan's life began to change. He was taken to the House of Hope, a shelter where children who had been abandoned or abused could find refuge and safety. At the House of Hope, Ethan was introduced to a different kind of life, one where kindness wasn't motivated by pity or fear, but by a genuine desire to help. He found friends, Lucas and Elena, 2 children who welcomed him into their world with open arms. But despite the warmth of his new surroundings, the fear still gnawed at him. The trauma of the past clung to him like a shadow, never truly leaving his side. He was safe, but only for now. The terror of Anthony's influence never disappeared, and as Ethan's past crept closer to the present, he began to fear for those who had protected him. He had seen the lengths to which Anthony would go to destroy lives, and he feared that Margaret, Ryan, and the others at the shelter could become victims of the same fate. When a strange man began to show up around the shelter, Ethan's worst fears were realized. He knew that Anthony's influence extended far beyond the airport, and it was only a matter of time before someone else would be sent to drag him back into that nightmare. But just as it seemed like Ethan was about to lose everything, his life took another turn. When Anthony's henchman, James, confronted him on a dark bridge, ready to hurt him, Ryan and the police were able to intervene. The years of fear and uncertainty came to a head, and for the first time, Ethan stood up to the people who had haunted him. With the help of Ryan, Margaret, and the police, James was arrested, and Anthony's reign of terror was finally coming to an end. As the dust settled, Ethan was offered a new beginning, a chance to have a real family, one that would not abandon him. When David, a friend of Ryan, found a family willing to adopt him, Ethan was faced with a decision that was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in his life, he had a chance to be loved and accepted for who he was, not for what he had been made to become. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Ethan wasn't walking it alone. He had found hope, a place to call home, and a family who truly cared for him. The scars of his past would take time to heal, but with the support of those who had helped him along the way, Ethan knew that he had a future full of possibilities that he had never thought possible. The boy who had once been abandoned and forgotten at LAX was no longer a ghost. He was a boy with a name, with a family, and with the hope for a better life ahead. Ethan's story is one of unimaginable hardship, where survival became his only goal, and hope seemed like a distant dream. At just 10 years old, Ethan was abandoned by his mother at Los Angeles International Airport, LAX. What began as an innocent wait for their flight soon turned into a terrifying reality. His mother, who had promised a wonderful trip, disappeared without a trace, leaving Ethan alone, without food or safety. The child's mind, filled with dreams of a sunny vacation, slowly turned to confusion and fear as time passed. His small body was left to fend for itself, wandering through the vast terminals of the airport, asking for help, but receiving only indifferent stares from passers-by. As hours turned to days, Ethan's hunger grew, and his once bright innocence was replaced with a harsh awareness of his dire situation. For 6 long years, Ethan learned how to survive in the cold, impersonal world of the airport. He scavenged for food from trash cans, finding what little scraps he could to fill his empty stomach. His once small voice calling for his mother was now replaced by the whispers of a desperate, neglected child trying to avoid detection. No one seemed to care. Security guards ignored him, and travelers barely took notice of the young boy who had become a ghost in the airport's sprawling hallways. The desperation that grew inside Ethan was palpable, and though he fought to maintain some hope, his survival instincts began to take over. He moved like a shadow, avoiding the eyes of authority, always on alert for the next threat, the next person who could harm him. Then, just as Ethan was learning to accept his fate, an encounter with a man named Anthony forced him to confront the worst of humanity. Anthony, a man with an air of manipulation, approached Ethan with a promise of food and warmth. But there was a darkness behind his kind words, and Ethan, though vulnerable, sensed that something wasn't right. When Anthony tried to grab him, Ethan's instincts kicked in and he fled, running as fast as his small legs could carry him. The encounter left him shaken, but it also solidified in Ethan's mind that trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. The world was cruel, and people were dangerous. But there was one person who refused to turn a blind eye to Ethan's suffering: Margaret, a flight attendant who had quietly noticed the boy's struggle. Over time, she became a rare beacon of hope in Ethan's otherwise bleak world. She offered him food when no one else would, showed him kindness when others ignored him. Margaret's gestures, small as they were, had a profound effect on Ethan. She was the first person to make him believe that not everyone was like Anthony. Despite her help, the shadow of Anthony lingered. As Ethan grew older, the truth of his abandonment began to take form. Anthony had orchestrated his mother's departure to use Ethan in his trafficking operations. The realization was a crushing blow, but it only made Ethan more determined to fight back. With the help of Ryan, a man from a charity that worked with homeless children, Ethan was taken to the House of Hope, a safe place where he could finally begin to heal. At the House of Hope, Ethan was introduced to other children who, despite their own struggles, welcomed him with open arms. He met Lucas and Elena, who quickly became his friends. For the first time, Ethan felt what it was like to belong. However, the shadow of his past refused to fade. One night, James, one of Anthony's henchmen, confronted Ethan again, threatening him. The confrontation nearly shattered Ethan's hard-won sense of safety, but Margaret and Ryan were there to protect him. They helped him face down the fear that had haunted him for so long. But just when it seemed like Ethan had finally escaped his past, James made a final, chilling threat. He revealed that Ethan's mother had been forced to abandon him by Anthony, and that the boy was always meant to be a pawn in a much larger, much darker game. The fear and betrayal that Ethan felt at that moment were unbearable. But with the unwavering support of Margaret and Ryan, he found the strength to stand up for himself. They took action, calling the police and making sure that Anthony's reign of terror was finally brought to an end. James was arrested, and Anthony was caught, his network dismantled. Ethan was no longer just a lost boy. He was a survivor, and for the first time in his life, he was free. Ethan's story didn't end with his escape from Anthony. With the help of Ryan and Margaret, Ethan was able to reclaim his identity and start over. He was given the chance to have a real family, a family that wouldn't abandon him. The Grant family, who had already adopted 2 children, offered him a home. Ethan hesitated, unsure of what family really meant after all he had been through, but he knew that he had to give himself the chance to belong. For the first time in years, Ethan smiled, truly smiled, as he took a step into a future that he could shape for himself. Ethan's story is one of both unimaginable hardship and incredible resilience. At just 10 years old, his world was torn apart when his mother abandoned him at Los Angeles International Airport, LAX. What began as a simple trip to the airport, filled with dreams of exciting destinations, quickly turned into a nightmare that would last for years. Ethan's mother, who promised him a magical flight to a beautiful place, disappeared without a trace after leaving him in the waiting area to buy tickets. He sat there, clutching his small backpack, waiting for her return, oblivious to the sorrowful look she had left behind. As minutes stretched into hours, Ethan's anxious waiting soon turned to confusion, and eventually, to panic. He ran through the terminal searching for her, asking anyone he could find if they had seen his mom, but all he encountered was indifference. Alone and desperate, Ethan soon realized the harsh reality that no one was looking for him, and no one cared. As days turned into weeks and then months, Ethan learned how to survive in the cold, indifferent world of the airport. He scrounged for food from trash bins, finding whatever scraps he could to feed himself, and learned how to avoid detection from security and travelers alike. His once bright, trusting eyes became those of a wary survivor, constantly on guard against the dangers that loomed around him. Despite the growing despair, Ethan's instincts for survival kept him moving forward. But even the most hardened survivors can't escape the trauma of abuse and neglect. Over time, the airport, which had once seemed like an exciting and bustling place, became Ethan's prison. He was trapped in a cycle of fear, hunger, and loneliness. His only form of solace came in fleeting moments of safety when he found refuge in hidden corners, avoiding the prying eyes of security guards and passers-by. One day, a man named Anthony approached him, offering food and warmth, but with a dark undertone. Ethan, though wary, was drawn to the man's words, as Anthony promised him safety and a place to stay. But when Anthony tried to grab him, Ethan's survival instincts kicked in, and he managed to escape, realizing that even those who seemed kind could not be trusted. Despite the constant threat of Anthony, Ethan remained determined not to fall victim to his manipulation. He was no longer just a child lost in the airport. He was a ghost, a shadow who had learned to navigate the dangers of the world alone. Then came Margaret, a flight attendant who had noticed Ethan's struggle. While others ignored him, she offered him food and kindness, showing him a small glimmer of hope that perhaps not everyone in the world was like Anthony. Margaret became his protector, offering him moments of respite when the world felt too heavy. But even with her help, the shadow of Anthony loomed large. As the years passed, Ethan's fears began to take root. He learned the devastating truth. His mother had not abandoned him of her own volition. She had been coerced by Anthony into leaving him behind. Ethan, the abandoned child, was now an asset in Anthony's twisted plan. The discovery was crushing, but it only fueled Ethan's determination to fight back. With the help of Ryan, a man from a charity dedicated to helping children like Ethan, and Margaret, he was brought to the House of Hope, a safe place where he could finally begin to heal. But even there, Ethan's past refused to let him go. James, one of Anthony's men, sought him out, threatening him with the same cruel words that had haunted him for years. Yet, with Margaret and Ryan standing by him, Ethan found the strength to face down his fears. The battle to free himself from Anthony's grip was far from over. When James confronted him once more, this time with a gun in his hand, Ethan had to summon every ounce of courage to fight back. In the end, it was the police, armed with the evidence provided by Ryan and Margaret, who arrested James and Anthony, bringing an end to their reign of terror. For the first time in his life, Ethan was free, but freedom came with its own set of challenges. As Ethan adjusted to his new life at the House of Hope, he realized that despite the love and support he now received from Margaret and Ryan, he still carried the scars of his past. The fear, the loneliness, the uncertainty, these were all deeply ingrained in him. Yet, with the help of Ryan and Margaret, he began to rebuild. In time, he was offered a chance at a new life by the Grant family, who wanted to adopt him. At first, Ethan hesitated, unsure of what family truly meant after everything he had been through. But with time, he came to realize that family wasn't just about blood, it was about the people who were willing to stand by you, to help you heal, and to give you a future. Daniel Bennett, no longer just a child lost in the shadows of the airport, had finally found his place in the world. His story is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope can be found. And with the support of those who truly care, anyone can begin to rebuild, one step at a time. Ethan's story is one of incredible hardship, resilience, and the fight for survival in the most unimaginable circumstances. At just 10 years old, Ethan's life was forever changed when his mother, under duress, abandoned him at Los Angeles International Airport, LAX. Initially, what seemed like a simple family trip quickly spiraled into a nightmare. Ethan's mother, who had promised him a magical vacation to a far-off place filled with sunshine and adventure, left him at the airport to buy plane tickets. But when she didn't return, the young boy's innocent world began to unravel. Alone and confused, Ethan waited for his mother, hoping she would come back. But as time passed, that hope started to fade. He searched for her everywhere, asking airport staff and strangers if they had seen his mother, but no one paid attention to him. The harsh reality was that no one was looking for him, and no one cared. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan was left to navigate the bustling airport all by himself, surviving on scraps of food, scavenged from trash bins, and relying on his instincts to stay hidden from security. He became a ghost of the airport, blending into the background, unnoticed by those around him. As he grew older, his ability to survive sharpened. He learned how to evade detection and how to survive in the harsh world that had left him behind. But even in the quiet corners of the airport, Ethan never stopped feeling the overwhelming sense of loneliness and abandonment. His only moments of comfort came when a kind stranger, Margaret, a flight attendant who had seen Ethan struggle, offered him food and a brief respite from the world that had cast him aside. But despite Margaret's kindness, Ethan remained wary of trusting anyone. His distrust was hard-earned, shaped by years of betrayal and isolation. But even with her help, Ethan's past continued to haunt him, especially when Anthony, the man who had forced his mother to abandon him, began to appear in his life again. Anthony was a predator who preyed on vulnerable children, and for years, Ethan had been his target. He had learned to run, to hide, and to survive, but Anthony's presence still loomed over him, casting a long shadow that was impossible to escape. Despite Anthony's threats and attempts to lure him back into his dangerous world, Ethan's resolve never wavered. He found unexpected allies in Ryan, a man from a local charity, and Margaret, who continued to protect him even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Together, they fought against the looming threat of Anthony, but even their support couldn't eliminate the fear that gripped Ethan's heart. He began to realize that the people around him truly cared, but the lingering trauma of his past made it hard for him to believe that he could ever have a normal life. But Ethan's journey didn't end there. As he continued to fight for his freedom, he eventually learned the devastating truth. His mother's abandonment had not been a choice, but a result of manipulation by Anthony. She had been forced into leaving him behind, thinking it would be the only way to save him from Anthony's grasp. This revelation shattered Ethan, but it also gave him the strength to move forward. The truth had been a heavy burden, but it also offered him a sense of closure that he had long been denied. As Ethan's battle against Anthony reached its climax, he found a new sense of hope when the authorities, armed with the evidence provided by Ryan and Margaret, arrested Anthony and his accomplices. The man who had tormented him for years was finally locked away, and Ethan could finally begin to heal. But the road to recovery wasn't easy. The scars of his past ran deep, and even though he was free from Anthony's grasp, the trauma of his experiences stayed with him. Margaret and Ryan never gave up on him, helping him rebuild his life from the ground up. And then, a new chapter in Ethan's life began when he was offered the chance to meet a couple, the Grants, who wanted to adopt him. At first, Ethan was hesitant. He had never known what it was like to have a family, and the idea of belonging to someone seemed almost foreign. But with Margaret and Ryan's encouragement, he decided to take a leap of faith. The Grant family welcomed him with open arms, and for the first time, Ethan began to understand what it meant to be loved and cared for. His story is a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of kindness, and the strength of the human spirit. Ethan's journey teaches us that even in the face of unimaginable challenges, we can find the courage to move forward. No matter how dark the past may be, there is always a chance for a brighter future, as long as we don't give up. Ethan's story is one of survival, heartbreak, and ultimately, redemption. At just 10 years old, he was abandoned at Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, by his mother, a decision made under duress and manipulation by a man named Anthony, a man who had a sinister plan for Ethan from the very beginning. Initially, Ethan's mother had promised him a magical trip filled with adventure, but when she left him at the airport to buy tickets, she never returned. For hours, Ethan waited, his young heart full of innocent hope, believing that his mother would come back for him. But as time passed, that hope turned into fear, and the confusion he felt quickly transformed into a painful reality. His mother was never coming back. Days stretched into weeks, and Ethan was forced to fend for himself in the crowded airport. Alone and frightened, he struggled to survive, scavenging for food and trying to avoid security. He quickly learned to move like a shadow, unnoticed by the busy world around him. Even when he was hungry and cold, Ethan's will to survive kept him going, even as he grew increasingly hopeless. His only moments of comfort came from brief interactions with Margaret, a flight attendant who noticed Ethan's struggle and quietly helped him when no one else seemed to care. Yet, despite Margaret's kindness, Ethan remained distant and skeptical. Having lived through betrayal and abandonment, he found it difficult to trust anyone, believing that no one could be counted on to stay. Throughout his time at the airport, Ethan was relentlessly pursued by Anthony, a dangerous figure who had manipulated his mother into abandoning him. Anthony was a trafficker, and for years he had his sights set on Ethan. Though Ethan tried to run and hide from him, Anthony always found a way to creep back into his life, reminding Ethan of the power and control he still held over him. But despite the ever-present threat, Ethan continued to fight. He learned to survive in the shadows, but deep down, the fear never fully left him. He wasn't just running from Anthony, he was running from the idea that his life could never have a normal future. The pivotal turning point came when Ryan, a man from a local charity, and Margaret finally convinced Ethan to trust them. Together, they helped him understand that he wasn't alone anymore. But even as Ethan tried to build a new life, the ghosts of his past continued to haunt him. One night, when he was staying at the shelter with Ryan and Margaret, he saw a car outside the window, and the familiar, haunting face of Anthony stared back at him. Despite the police involvement, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Anthony's reach extended beyond what they could control. His fears came to a head when Anthony made one final attempt to pull Ethan back into his web of manipulation. But this time, Ethan refused to be controlled. With the help of Ryan and Margaret, Ethan confronted Anthony on a dark, deserted road, but the situation quickly escalated into a dangerous car chase. As Anthony and his accomplices tried to run them off the road, Ethan realized that he had to make a choice. Keep running and hide from the world, or stand up and face the terror that had defined his life for years. In a moment of clarity, Ethan chose to fight back. With Ryan's help, Anthony was finally captured, and the years of fear and manipulation came to an end. However, even as the police arrested Anthony, Ethan's journey was far from over. He still had to rebuild his life, a task that seemed daunting after years of living as a nameless, invisible child. The next chapter of Ethan's life began when he was given a chance to be part of a real family. With the Grant family offering their support, Ethan hesitated at first, uncertain if he could trust anyone again. But with the gentle guidance of Margaret and Ryan, he found the courage to take that leap of faith. The Grant family, kind and loving, welcomed him with open arms, giving Ethan the chance to experience love and warmth for the first time in his life. As Ethan began to heal, he learned that family wasn't just something you were born into. It was something that was built day by day through trust, love, and commitment. For the first time in many years, Ethan felt like he belonged. His past, filled with pain and isolation, no longer defined who he was. With the Grant family, he had the opportunity to rewrite his story, and as he sat by the window that night, staring at the stars, he finally understood that no matter how dark the past had been, his future was his to shape. Ethan's story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of kindness and second chances. He learned that no matter what life throws at you, it's never too late to rebuild and find hope in the most unexpected places. Ethan's journey is one of heartache, survival, and the incredible resilience of a young boy who faced unimaginable challenges. At just 10 years old, he was abandoned at Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, by his mother, who, under the control of a man named Anthony, left him behind with no explanation. Initially, Ethan's mother promised him a magical journey, a future filled with adventure and new experiences. But when she walked away to buy tickets, Ethan never imagined it would be the last time he would see her. As hours passed and his mother failed to return, confusion and worry set in, and Ethan's belief that she would come back turned into painful doubt. What started as a promise of a bright future quickly became a nightmare. Days turned into weeks, and the once innocent and trusting boy found himself alone, scared, and fighting for survival at one of the world's busiest airports. As the days wore on, Ethan had to learn how to survive in a world where he no longer had a name or a home. He learned to avoid security guards, to hide in the shadows, and to scavenge for food when no one was looking. The constant fear of being caught and the loneliness that came with it weighed heavily on him. Ethan, just a child, had to grow up fast in a world that had forgotten him. The kindness of a few people, like Margaret, a flight attendant who gave him food and comfort when no one else noticed, was the only light in an otherwise dark and desolate existence. Yet, despite these small moments of kindness, Ethan had lost all faith in people. His past experiences had taught him that everyone left, that no one could be trusted. He was alone, and he believed that would always be the case. But his life was about to change. Despite the looming threat of Anthony, a man involved in human trafficking who had seen Ethan as part of his plan from the very beginning, Ethan held on to the hope that one day he would find safety. Anthony's grip on Ethan's life was unshakable, and he made it clear that he was always watching, always waiting for Ethan to fall into his trap. However, Ethan was determined to fight back. He had learned that running wasn't the answer, and he was no longer willing to live in fear. When Ryan, a man from a local charity, and Margaret stepped into his life, they gave him a reason to trust again. They saw him not as an abandoned child, but as a human being worthy of care and compassion. It was with their help that Ethan began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could escape the darkness that Anthony had forced him into. However, Anthony wasn't finished with Ethan. Even after Anthony was arrested, the threat didn't end. Anthony had left a trail of fear and manipulation, and despite being behind bars, his influence continued to haunt Ethan. One night, as Ethan and his protectors, Margaret and Ryan, were driving to safety, they found themselves in a terrifying chase with Anthony's associates, and they were forced to make a dangerous escape. But in that moment, Ethan's resolve hardened. He refused to be a victim anymore. No longer was he running from the past, he was ready to face it. The breaking point came when Ryan and Margaret helped Ethan confront the fear that Anthony had instilled in him. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about reclaiming his life and taking control of his future. In the end, Anthony was caught, and the police, armed with enough evidence to stop him for good, brought him to justice. Yet, for Ethan, the real victory wasn't just seeing Anthony behind bars, it was in his decision to leave behind the darkness of his past and start anew. With the help of Ryan and Margaret, Ethan was able to find a real family. He was no longer an invisible child, lost in the crowd. With the Grant family, Ethan discovered that family wasn't just something you were born into, it was something you created day by day, with love, trust, and shared experiences. Though Ethan struggled to open his heart to the Grant family, he slowly began to realize that the love and care they offered him were not just empty promises. For the first time in years, Ethan began to feel the warmth of belonging. Ethan's story is a powerful reminder that no matter how dark the past may be, the future is still in our hands. It's about survival, yes, but it's also about forgiveness, trust, and the unwavering belief that anyone can find light in their life again, even after the worst of storms. Ethan's journey from abandonment to hope shows that no matter what we go through, there is always the possibility of finding a place to belong, a family to love, and a future worth fighting for. Ethan's story is one of resilience, survival, and a remarkable transformation that shows the strength of the human spirit. At just 10 years old, he was abandoned at Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, by his mother, who promised him a new adventure, only to leave him behind without explanation. As the hours turned into days, Ethan found himself alone, lost in the vastness of the airport, surrounded by strangers who ignored him, and security personnel who failed to notice the child in distress. The warm excitement he once felt about his journey to a magical place was quickly replaced by a sense of fear and confusion. Ethan had no idea that the promise of a beautiful future had vanished in a single moment, and his trust in his mother and in people would be shattered. For weeks, Ethan struggled to survive in the airport, learning to avoid detection and scavenge for food when no one was looking. His only companionship came from his backpack, which he held tightly as he wandered the airport halls, his small body becoming more frail with each passing day. The loneliness was unbearable, and the thought of his mother's absence was a constant pain. Yet, even in the darkest of times, Ethan's resilience began to shine through. He refused to give up hope, believing that his mother would return to take him to the place they had once dreamed of. But as the days turned into weeks, Ethan's faith in that promise began to fade, and he realized he had to rely on himself if he wanted to survive. One fateful night, as Ethan slept on the cold airport benches, he met Margaret, a kind-hearted flight attendant who saw past the surface of the abandoned child and recognized the pain he was in. Margaret's small acts of kindness, like offering him food and a shoulder to lean on, were the first signs of compassion Ethan had experienced in weeks. She treated him with care and dignity, never once making him feel invisible. But even with Margaret's help, Ethan had learned to trust no one. His world had been one of betrayal and abandonment, and he had no idea how to trust again. Yet, Margaret did not give up on him. She saw the good in him, even when Ethan struggled to see it in himself. As Anthony, the man responsible for Ethan's abandonment, began to loom larger in his life, Ethan knew he had to escape his grasp. The man, who had sinister ties to human trafficking, made it clear that Ethan was a part of his plan. The darkness that Anthony represented loomed over Ethan's every decision, and he found himself caught in a never-ending battle between survival and fear. But as time passed, Ethan became determined not to let fear dictate his life. The kindness of Margaret and Ryan, a man from a charity who offered Ethan a chance at a different life, started to help him heal. They gave him a place to call home, a place where he no longer had to hide and where he could learn to trust again. Despite Anthony's manipulative hold on him, Ethan refused to become a pawn in his game. He stood firm, knowing that he wasn't alone anymore. The support from Margaret and Ryan gave him the courage to push forward, to fight for his future. But the battle wasn't over. Anthony still had people working for him, and his shadow continued to haunt Ethan's every step. Yet, with Ryan and Margaret by his side, Ethan found strength he never knew he had. When Anthony threatened him once more, Ethan was ready to face him head-on, knowing that he had the support of people who truly cared about him. The final turning point came when Anthony was arrested, but even then, Ethan could not fully escape the trauma of his past. The fear, the threats, and the uncertainty still haunted him. Yet, through it all, he never gave up. With the support of Ryan and Margaret and the community of people who cared about him, Ethan learned that healing wasn't just about escaping his past. It was about creating a future full of love, hope, and new beginnings. In the end, Ethan's story is one of survival, but also of redemption. He learned that the love and protection of others can provide the strength needed to overcome even the darkest of times. It's a story that reminds us of the power of kindness and compassion, and how one person's belief in another can change everything. For Ethan, his journey from the airport to the warmth of a family and a future was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. No matter how deep the scars, the potential for healing is always there, waiting for those brave enough to take the first step towards hope. Ethan's story is one of deep pain, survival, and ultimately finding a new path through compassion and perseverance. At just 10 years old, his life changed forever when his mother left him alone at Los Angeles International Airport, telling him she would return, but never came back. Abandoned in a place filled with strangers, Ethan's world collapsed. The excitement of a promised trip to a new and magical place quickly turned into a haunting nightmare. Hours stretched into days, and then weeks. With each passing moment, Ethan's hope and faith slowly slipped away. Alone, confused, and desperate, he was forced to survive in the vast airport, learning how to avoid security and scavenge for food when no one was looking. The airport, once a symbol of adventure, became a cold, isolating cage. As days bled into weeks, Ethan wandered the airport halls, his small body growing weaker, his heart filled with an aching loneliness. He was no longer the excited child who had arrived full of wonder and anticipation. He had become a ghost of the place, moving silently through the crowds, ignored and unseen. His stomach ached from hunger, and the fear of being forgotten became a constant companion. The loneliness was unbearable. But Ethan's resilience grew stronger with every passing day. Despite the overwhelming sense of abandonment, he held on to a single, fragile thread of hope. His mother would come back. She had to. But as the days passed, his hope began to fade, replaced by the harsh reality that no one was looking for him. He had no choice but to rely on himself. One fateful night, as Ethan curled up in a hidden corner, exhausted and starving, he encountered Margaret, a compassionate flight attendant who saw past his scruffy exterior and recognized the depth of his pain. Margaret offered him food and warmth, an act of kindness that was the first glimpse of compassion Ethan had seen in what felt like forever. Though still skeptical and fearful, Ethan found himself trusting Margaret, if only a little. But the pain of his abandonment ran deep, and trusting anyone again felt impossible. Even with Margaret's kindness, Ethan was still trapped in the painful cycle of fear and survival, unable to break free from the isolation he had built around himself. The man who had caused Ethan's suffering, Anthony, loomed in the shadows, a constant reminder of the danger that still threatened him. As Anthony's manipulation and control over Ethan became clear, the boy realized he needed to escape. But the man was cunning, his dark influence spreading far beyond the airport. He had ties to human trafficking, and Ethan was just one of his many pawns. For years, Ethan had lived in fear of Anthony, hiding from him, running from him, but never truly escaping. But with Margaret and Ryan by his side, a glimmer of hope began to shine through. They provided him with a new opportunity, a chance at a life beyond the airport and beyond the man who had abandoned him. Ryan, a kind man with a deep understanding of the struggles Ethan had faced, offered him shelter, safety, and the chance to rebuild his life. However, even with Anthony behind bars, the shadows of Ethan's past were not easily erased. The fear that Anthony's influence would follow him lingered like a dark cloud. Ethan was not free. The man's threats continued to haunt him, and he feared for his future and the safety of those who had helped him. As the days passed, the weight of Anthony's control still loomed over him, even though Ryan and Margaret tried to reassure him that he was safe. Ethan's anxiety grew, as every strange figure or unfamiliar situation reminded him of the danger that still lurked. But it was during these moments of fear that Ethan realized something profound. He was not alone anymore. The people who cared about Margaret, Ryan, and the other children at the shelter had become his new family. They had chosen to protect him, to give him a chance at a life free from fear. In this new environment, Ethan began to learn what it meant to truly belong. It wasn't an immediate change, and it didn't come without struggle. But every day, Ethan took small steps toward healing, toward trusting others, and toward believing that he could create a future of his own. The turning point came when Ethan, now a little older, was faced with a choice: continue to live in fear of his past, or move forward with the new family that had chosen to support him. As the support from Margaret, Ryan, and others solidified, Ethan began to see that his future wasn't defined by his past. He wasn't just a boy abandoned at an airport anymore. He was Daniel Bennett, a boy with a future, with hope, and with the chance to create something new. The love and protection he had found gave him the courage to face his darkest fears and begin building the life he deserved. Ethan's journey teaches us that no matter how difficult the past may be, it doesn't have to define who we are. With love, kindness, and the willingness to trust again, we can rebuild, find healing, and create new opportunities for ourselves. His story is a powerful reminder of the impact a kind word, a supportive hand, or a simple act of compassion can have on someone's life. Ethan found his family not through blood, but through the connections he made with those who truly cared about him. He learned that family is not about where you come from, but about who chooses to stand by you when you need it the most. Ethan's story is one of endurance, survival, and the unbreakable hope that even the darkest circumstances can be overcome. At just 10 years old, Ethan's world came crashing down when his mother, under mysterious and tragic circumstances, left him alone at the Los Angeles International Airport. She had promised to return after buying tickets, but she never did. As hours turned to days, and then weeks, Ethan found himself abandoned in an unfamiliar and vast airport, surrounded by strangers, with no way to make sense of what had happened. What followed were days of intense fear and loneliness, as Ethan survived by scavenging for food and avoiding security. The airport, once an exciting place of adventure, became his prison, a cold and lifeless backdrop to his struggle for survival. Despite his exhaustion, hunger, and isolation, Ethan clung to the hope that his mother would return. That hope, however, began to fade as he spent nights curled up in corners, hiding from the world. His faith wavered with every passing hour as he realized that no one was coming for him. Amidst the chaotic world of the airport, Ethan was forced to grow up quickly. He became a ghost of the airport, moving in silence, unnoticed by the busy travelers around him. Days blended together in a blur of hunger, exhaustion, and fear. His once joyful spirit was replaced by a hardened resilience, a survival instinct that helped him navigate his new, unrecognizable world. Yet, despite his best efforts to hold on to his mother's promise, the truth was sinking in. He was alone. One of the few moments of kindness Ethan encountered was when Margaret, a flight attendant, noticed him one night and offered him food. Her compassion, a simple meal and a warm blanket, was the first glimpse of humanity he had experienced in weeks. For a fleeting moment, Ethan felt a spark of trust and hope that maybe there were people who cared. However, his painful past and the fear of being abandoned again kept him at a distance, reluctant to trust anyone completely. As time passed, Ethan learned that survival in the airport was about more than just hiding and scavenging. He had to constantly evade security guards and the people who might harm him. It was clear that he was not entirely safe, even in the supposed sanctuary of the airport. Ethan was always looking over his shoulder, knowing that Anthony, a dangerous man linked to human trafficking, was watching him. Anthony's presence was a constant reminder of the sinister world that had swallowed Ethan whole. Ethan had lived in fear of Anthony for years, always on the run, always one step ahead, but never fully escaping the shadow of this man's dark influence. Yet, there was a moment when Ethan realized that his life could change, that his past didn't have to dictate his future. That moment came when Ryan and Margaret offered him a chance for something new, a new life, away from the fear and uncertainty of the airport. With their guidance, Ethan began to see that perhaps there was hope beyond the nightmare he had known. Ethan still feared that Anthony's people might be watching him, waiting for the moment to strike. Even in the face of these looming threats, Ethan grew stronger. With Ryan and Margaret by his side, he slowly realized that he didn't have to face his fears alone. They were there for him, offering not only safety, but something even more precious, a chance for a future that wasn't shaped by trauma and fear. With their support, Ethan began to believe in something he hadn't in years' hope. He started to understand that while the past was something that couldn't be changed, the future was still in his hands. But as he began to open up to the possibility of a new life, the fear of Anthony still lingered. It was a fear that seemed impossible to shake, even as Ethan moved forward with the people who cared for him. The fear that Anthony would return, that the safety he had started to feel would be ripped away in an instant, haunted him daily. He had spent so many years running, hiding, and surviving, and that kind of trauma doesn't simply vanish. It's a wound that takes time to heal. Ethan's journey was never easy, but the love and support he received from Ryan, Margaret, and the other children at the shelter helped him start a new chapter in his life. He was no longer just a lost boy. He was becoming someone with a future, someone who mattered. And though the trauma of his past would always be a part of him, Ethan learned that he could choose not to let it define him. With the help of his new family, he found the strength to stand tall, to let go of the fear, and to finally step into a life full of possibilities. Ethan's story serves as a powerful reminder that no matter how dark the past may be, with resilience, hope, and the support of those who care, we can overcome the most difficult challenges. It is never too late to find a place where we belong, to create a family, and to begin anew. Through his story, Ethan teaches us that survival is not just about enduring hardship, it's about believing in the possibility of a better future and fighting for it, no matter what. Daniel's story is one of unimaginable hardship, resilience, and the search for hope in the face of overwhelming odds. At just 10 years old, Daniel was abandoned at Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, left to wait for a mother who never returned. She had promised to return after buying tickets for their flight, but she never came back, and Daniel's young heart slowly realized that he was all alone. Initially, he held on to the belief that his mother would return any minute, but as hours turned into days and days turned into weeks, his innocence was shattered, and fear began to creep into his thoughts. Alone in the crowded airport, Daniel was thrust into a harsh reality where no one seemed to care. He had no money, no food, and no one to turn to for help. His once hopeful world began to close in on him, and survival became his only goal. In the beginning, Daniel tried to avoid being noticed, moving like a ghost through the airport's crowded halls. But despite his efforts to stay invisible, the coldness of the world around him became unbearable. No one paid attention to the young boy wandering alone, searching for food in trash cans and trying to find a place to sleep. The airport, once a place filled with excitement and possibility, now felt like a cage, cold, lonely, and indifferent. But despite the cruelty he faced, Daniel's will to survive did not fade. He learned to hide in corners, to sleep unnoticed, and to fend for himself. The airport, with all its busy travelers and distractions, became his world, and yet he had no one to call family, no one to help him, and no one to care. But even in such isolation, Daniel's life was touched by moments of unexpected kindness. Margaret, a flight attendant who worked at the airport, saw beyond the dirt and desperation to the scared, hungry child underneath. She offered him food and small gestures of comfort, showing him that kindness still existed in the world, even in the unlikeliest places. Ryan, a kind-hearted man from a local charity, also reached out, offering Daniel the safety and support that he so desperately needed. Through Margaret and Ryan, Daniel began to glimpse the possibility of something different, something better than his lonely existence at the airport. However, despite their kindness, Daniel still struggled to trust, burdened by the years of abandonment and neglect. The trauma of being alone for so long left him afraid to get too close to anyone. And in the back of his mind, there was always the threat of Anthony, a dangerous man who had terrorized him and used the airport as his hunting ground. Anthony's dark presence was never far, and even as Daniel found small moments of safety, the fear of Anthony never truly left. Daniel's new life at the shelter, where Ryan and Margaret tried to provide him with care and stability, was both a gift and a burden. He was learning to live again, but the fear of being watched, of being found, haunted him. Even when Anthony was arrested, the shadows of the past still loomed over Daniel's life. It wasn't until one night, when Daniel spotted a figure watching him from a car, that he realized Anthony's influence still lingered. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, and Daniel couldn't escape the fear that Anthony's reach extended beyond the prison walls. Even in the face of these lingering fears, Daniel began to find a sense of security. He trusted Ryan and Margaret, but the past was a constant reminder that safety could be fleeting. Still, Daniel held on to the belief that his future could be different. When Margaret took him for a walk through the city, Daniel saw a world outside the airport, one that he had never known. It was a world of normalcy, families walking together, people laughing in cafes. For the first time in years, Daniel saw that there was a place for him outside of his painful past. Yet, even as Daniel began to embrace this new world, Anthony's shadow loomed large. When he learned the truth about his mother's abandonment, that Anthony had been the one to force her to leave him behind, it felt like a betrayal. The final blow came when James Rivers, one of Anthony's associates, confronted him with the cruel truth. His mother had left him behind, not out of neglect, but out of fear. She had been forced into abandoning him in the hopes that he would survive. This revelation shook Daniel to his core, but it also gave him the strength to stand up to his past and refuse to let it control him any longer. The confrontation with James was a pivotal moment for Daniel. It was the moment he decided that he would no longer be a victim. Despite James's threats, despite the lingering fear, Daniel stood tall, his heart filled with determination. And when Anthony was arrested for his crimes, Daniel finally felt like the world had shifted. He was no longer just a lost boy. He was a survivor. With the help of Ryan, Margaret, and the community that embraced him, Daniel was given a chance to rebuild his life. He was no longer just the boy abandoned at the airport. He was Daniel Bennett, a young man with a future. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel was ready to take that future into his own hands, leaving the shadows of his past behind him. Daniel's life took a turn that no child should ever experience. At just 10 years old, he was abandoned at Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, by his mother, who promised to return after buying plane tickets for their flight. But as the hours passed, Daniel's hopeful heart began to break. His mother never came back, and he was left stranded in a crowded airport, completely alone. For days, Daniel clung to the hope that his mother would return. But as time passed, his isolation grew deeper. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel, with no family to rely on, learned the painful reality that survival was now his only priority. Without food, money, or any way of contacting anyone, Daniel was forced to adapt to his new environment. The once bustling airport became his world, and he learned how to navigate it like a ghost, hiding in corners, searching through trash for food, and sleeping wherever he could. Despite his determination to survive, Daniel was not truly invisible. He was seen by a few compassionate individuals, like Margaret, a flight attendant who had been observing him from afar. She quietly offered him food and care whenever she could, showing Daniel that there was still kindness left in the world. But Daniel, having endured so much pain and abandonment, struggled to trust anyone. He had been alone for far too long, and the scars of his past kept him from accepting help. Even as Ryan, a kind-hearted man working with a local charity, offered him a way out, Daniel could not bring himself to believe that anyone would truly care for him. As Daniel continued to survive, always looking over his shoulder for Anthony, a dangerous man who had been using the airport as his hunting ground, he found himself torn between his fear of being hurt again and the chance for something better. For 6 long years, Daniel lived like this, surviving on scraps and constantly looking over his shoulder, haunted by the threat of Anthony's return. He had become hardened, no longer the innocent boy who trusted the world, but a survivor who had learned to navigate a cruel and indifferent society. But even in the midst of all the darkness, there were moments of light. When Margaret and Ryan finally took him under their wing, Daniel started to believe in the possibility of a different future. They offered him food, safety, and most importantly, the idea that he could belong somewhere. But the fear of Anthony never left Daniel's mind. Even when the police arrested Anthony and he was taken away, Daniel still felt like the man's reach was long, stretching beyond prison walls. The fear of Anthony's return stayed with Daniel, and he had to learn to face his past if he ever hoped to heal. One fateful day, while on a walk with Margaret, Daniel saw Anthony once again, lurking in the shadows. The encounter triggered a flood of painful memories, but this time, Daniel didn't run. Instead, Margaret protected him, and for the first time, Daniel realized that he wasn't alone anymore. He had a new family, people who genuinely cared for him and were willing to fight for his safety. The next step in Daniel's journey came when he confronted the reality of his identity. Anthony had manipulated and controlled him for so long, but now Daniel was free. He was no longer just a nameless child wandering the airport. He was Daniel Bennett, a boy with a future. But his journey wasn't over. As he continued to heal, Daniel struggled with the memories of being abandoned, the years he had spent in solitude, and the lies he had been told about his mother. But through it all, he learned that family wasn't just something you were born into, it was something you built, one day at a time. With the help of Ryan, Margaret, and others who cared for him, Daniel finally began to feel like he belonged. He was given a new name, a new life, and most importantly, the chance to move beyond his past. He met a potential adoptive family, the Grant family, and although Daniel was unsure at first, he took the brave step of accepting their offer to become a part of their family. Through this, Daniel realized that while his past would always be a part of him, it didn't have to define him. With the love and support of those around him, Daniel could finally build the life he deserved, a life filled with love, belonging, and hope. This paragraph captures Daniel's emotional journey from abandonment to healing, using language and themes relevant to an American audience, focusing on his growth, resilience, and the importance of kindness and second chances. Life is often filled with challenges, some of which can feel insurmountable. Daniel's story teaches us the importance of resilience, kindness, and the power of human connection. Despite enduring abandonment and fear, Daniel never lost hope. He learned to trust again, not because people were perfect, but because love and care have the power to heal even the deepest wounds. This reminds us that no matter how old we are never truly alone. There will always be people who care, even when the world feels indifferent. Daniel's journey also teaches us that we are not defined by our past, but by our ability to move forward, to build new connections, and to find peace within ourselves. The lessons of patience, forgiveness, and resilience resonate deeply, especially as we face our own challenges, whether they be loss, health issues, or the passage of time. It's never too late to start anew, to open our hearts to those who care, and to create a new chapter in our lives filled with hope and meaning. Life may bring us hardships, but it also brings us the opportunity to rise, to embrace love, and to find purpose, no matter the circumstances. Thank you for watching. We hope Daniel's story has touched your heart. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to Stories TH for more heartwarming stories.